Hello students, welcome back to our CLE Form 4. In our previous lesson, we looked at Christian ethics. And now, we introduce ourselves to the second topic, which is human sexuality. Human sexuality. This is chapter 2, the second topic of Form 4 work. What is human sexuality? Human sexuality is actually what makes us either male or female, men or women, boys or girls. It is actually the makeup. It is what makes us. It is what makes us either boys or girls, men or women, and male or females. That's what we call human sexuality. So what we are saying is that it's the total makeup of a human being. It is actually what makes one either a man or a woman who is a human being. It must be noted that sexuality is not sex, but it's an integral part. Sex is an integral part. It's an integral component of sexuality. So sexuality is not sex. Is not sex. But sex is an integral component of sexuality. Of sexuality. Therefore, what we do, most of our activities, how we behave, how we talk, is actually influenced by what we call human sexuality. So it is actually influenced by, what we are saying is that most of our activities are influenced by our sex instincts. Sex instincts. The fact that you know you are a man and not a woman, you actually behave like a man and not a woman. So this is sexuality. For example, we can easily distinguish a man from a woman by the way of dress, the way of talk. Even if a woman took a man's suits and even shaved the man's style, she will still look a woman. And even if a man took a skirt or a dress and wore it, he will still appear like a man. Therefore, the way we dress, the way we talk, our physical appearances actually distinguish us from one another, from men, from women. Even when it comes to life activities, you find that there are some activities that men will do which women will not do. For example, it's until recently when activities like wrestling, women have begun endeavoring in them. Boxing, they are meant for men. Until recently, rugby and cricket. So it has been, they are known to be games for men. They are predominantly, we are not saying that women may not participate, but they are known to be predominantly for men. Others, like netball, it's known to be for women, although of late, even men are endeavoring in netball. These ones are basically played by women. However, most games are not limited to particular sex. That is, as far as games are concerned. What of biological differences? There are biological differences between men and women. And when we look at the biological differences, what we see is that actually these differences make us also it actually leads us to the different functional and psychological differences. It's no wonder men and women biologically look different, and therefore even their functions are also different. For example, when it comes to procreation, the role of a man and that of a woman are very different, and it's simply determined by human sexuality. Now, women will conceive, but cannot conceive without the men. Therefore, human sexuality determines it. Women will give birth, women will breastfeed, and it's all determined by human sexuality because they are women. Biologically, they are destined to do those roles. They also perform other roles such as household chores, e.g. cooking, fetching water, firewood, and many other activities which are looked at as if they are not as demanding as those ones that are carried out by men. So when we look at sexuality, we find that it's actually an integral aspect in all of human personality. It determines what kind of personalities that we actually have. Why? Because it provides all aspects of what it means to be human. Human sexuality expresses itself in the way people behave, the way they talk, the way they think, their attitudes. You find that women will think differently from men, not because they cannot think like men, but sexuality has destined them to think so, to think in that line, simply because they are women. The way they think, their attitudes, their appreciation of self, and appreciation of others, and even appreciation of world, you find that the attitude between men and women towards this is actually different. However, we are reminded that we need to be happy in the state we find ourselves in. Nobody decided to be born a woman or a man, male or female. We found ourselves so. And therefore, we encourage everybody to be happy with his or her state, whether it's a boy or a girl, man or a woman, and not to attempt to change ourselves because God destined it to be so. We should accept our sexuality because it is sacred. It is God-given. It's God's decision that we be so. It is actually a gift from God. It is a gift from God that we either be men or women. Remember, to carry out his roles in this world. However, we cannot rule out that sexuality will somehow influence our thinking and behavior. And students, you need to think of how human sexuality influences you as a person into the way you think, the way you behave, the way you appreciate yourself, the way you appreciate others, and even the way you appreciate the world. Are you really influenced by sexuality to a great extent or to a less extent? You can discuss that during your own free time. To what extent does human sexuality influence your behavior, your thinking, and your attitude towards yourself, others, and even the world surrounding you? And now I want us to look at how human sexuality was perceived in a traditional African society. How was human sexuality understood or taken in a traditional African society? Or how was the understanding of human sexuality? How did they take it? African traditional societies. In a traditional, by now, I believe that all students understand what we mean by an African traditional society. These are pure African society, which is not interfered with by either Western culture or Western religion. And therefore, it should be a pure African society in Africa. So, how did they perceive human sexuality? Among African societies, sexuality is regarded as sacred. It is God-given. It is a gift from God. It is sacred and it is treated as a secret. It is only God who has the secret and who reveals the secret. So it is a secret in many African communities. The sacredness, the holiness of sexuality in an African traditional society is actually related to the power to transmit life. So the sacredness is found in the power to transmit life, because it is through human sexuality that different sexes will come together and actually transmit life. And this is a secret only God, which is only understood by God alone. And therefore, in an African traditional society, it was, or it is still, a great concern to the kind of education that is provided to the young people. Who provides education? What kind of education is provided to the young people? It is a matter of great concern, especially when it comes to sexual matters. We find that in an African traditional society, it was a taboo, and it is still a taboo, to discuss sexual matters openly. Why? Because sex is sacred, sexuality is sacred, and therefore it's not something that should be discussed openly. And therefore, discussing sexual matters openly was a taboo. And of course, a taboo was punishable, or it's still punishable. However, it does not mean that this education was not offered. The education, the sex education, was still offered, but it was offered to the young children by their grandparents. So grandparents were entrusted in the education to the young. So we have said that sex education was offered to the young children by grandparents. So grandmothers were entrusted to give sex education to the girls, to the young girls, while grandfathers were entrusted on the boys. Why the grandparents? Why not the mothers and the fathers? This is so we need to ask ourselves why the grandparents, and we give reasons. This is because the grandparents are experienced in sex matters. They are also knowledgeable. They are knowledgeable in sex matters, and therefore whatever they will be telling the young children, the young boys and girls, they will have ample knowledge about them, and at the same time they have ample free time. Ample free time. And I believe we can add some others. For example, a child will be more free to a grandmother than a mother. And therefore, also that we can add. We can even add up to 5. Students, try and find out which other reasons. When you relate with your grandparents, how do you find them? What do you think you become? What do you think makes you more open to your grandparent than you to your parents? And you add the number of those points. So, but what we have concluded is that the grandparents who offered sex education to the young. Now, that is when they are very young. And whenever the young people mixed, of course, they had to be supervised. They had to mix within permitted boundaries. During initiation, however, this is at a young stage. But during initiation, and we know that many African countries actually initiated their young, both boys and girls for some, and for some, boys alone. So during these ceremonies, we are told rigorous sex education was given. Rigorous sex education was given to the initiatees. Why? Because they are now maturing. They are now becoming mature. They are almost becoming adults. And therefore this knowledge now is becoming necessary to prepare them for life, for adult life. So they are taught about sex. They are also taught about secrets in the mystery of manhood and womanhood. And it is at this stage whereby they are taught that the essence of sex is only for procreation. Girls are expected to remain virgins, this is what they are taught, until marriage. And if any girl fails to maintain her virginity or breaks her virginity before marriage, then she stands the danger of either being divorced on the wedding day or being married off as a second wife to an old man. Therefore, virginity was valued. Virginity was valued or is still valued in an African traditional society. What of those who raped others? Were there rapists then? If there were any, we are told they were punished. Rape offenders were severely punished. This to discourage them from the act. Boys and girls were not allowed and are not allowed to mix freely except under strict supervision. When it comes to work, there is division of work. There is division of work according to sex and age. Or rather, work was divided on the basis of sexuality and also age. For example, women were not allowed to do heavy tasks, more taxing tasks. Those ones were left for men. For example, lasoring, hunting, clearing thick bushes, cultivating, building houses. That was work for men. Because women naturally, while weak, were looked at as weak. While women, in most cases, were given lighter tasks or lighter chores. Now, there is a difference. There was a difference in the way they approached life for both the boys and the girls, right from birth to death. For example, at birth, when a baby was a girl, in some communities, they communicated to the people differently. We can give the example of the Agikoyo. When a girl was born, they urinated 4 times. But if it was a boy, they urinated 5 times. Only to communicate. That was to communicate to the people who were supposed to come and see the child. They could know by the number of urinations that were given. At adolescence, boys teamed up with their fathers in order to learn their laws from their fathers, while girls teamed up with their mothers. So it is at this stage that boys learned that they could carry out some masculine duties, e.g. herding animals, clearing bushes, and the like. At puberty, girls and boys are given special teaching which is meant to prepare them for adulthood. And during this stage, it is the time that both of them are actually taught, both boys and girls are taught how to relate with the opposite sex and how to behave if one married or joined an opposite sex. For example, girls were taught on how to behave when they got married, how to treat their husbands, and even how to take care of children. And boys, on the other hand, are taught how to handle sex, how to handle a marriage partner, how to relate with in-laws, and how to protect families. In community affairs, when it came to community affairs, the role of women is limited to domestic responsibilities, like of course bearing children, taking care of the children, taking care of their husbands, while the boys are prepared to take over the leadership roles and of course make important decisions not only for the families but also for the communities. And therefore, when you look at human sexuality, it actually determined the kind of life one was to live from birth to death. Now, this is how sexuality was perceived in an African traditional society. Why can't we look at how human sexuality is perceived in a Christian setup? What do Christians teach about human sexuality? And then we can now compare in the next lesson. Goodbye.